I often like to say that we need to make sure our expectations are realistic around dropping anchor. So we're certainly not saying that it's an off switch for really difficult, painful emotions and stress. It's more of a thing to help us cope with that, to help us ground and stay stable and control our focus and our attention and what we're doing at those times. So it's to give us more what we might call psychological flexibility. So the flexibility to have difficult thoughts and feelings and still keep doing the things we care about and still doing things that are supportive and compassionate to ourselves, no matter what that difficult experience is. The nice side effect is often, our emotions will get back to more of a wave-like sort of quality. If you think, we often think about the example of zebras. I may have used this before in this group, forgive me if I have, but repetition is always useful. If a zebra is chased by a lion across the savannah and somehow it manages to get away, very quickly it shakes off all the kind of stress and adrenaline, and then it just goes back to eating or hanging out with its group. But you imagine if any one of us was in that same situation and we'd been chased by a lion, somehow we managed to get free, would we shake it off and go and start eating our lunch or, going and hanging out with people? Of course, the answer is no. It's highly likely our mind would be looping over, what happened there? How can I prevent it? It might even be picturing the worst and imagining what could have happened. It might be worrying about it happening again, or, being really hard on ourselves for walking across the savannah alone without anyone there, or any number of things our mind might be doing. So we're very different to the other animals in that sense. And that's why our emotions aren't that kind of wave-like quality that other animals experience. They can get really high and stay really high. And some of it is because of our environment. If you put an animal in a very difficult environment, then they're not going to have the same wave-like structure. So part of it is that, and we get learnt helplessness and things like that in animals where they sort of just give up because there's too much stress and danger. But if it's not that dangerous an environment, they will have this wave-like flow. And part of the reason we don't is that our mind starts all these secondary processes and it keeps the emotion really high. So, what we want to do with mindfulness is get out of that stuff so that we're not adding in those secondary loops that amp up the emotion and keep it high. That's our dropping anchor practice, and you notice that I add different things into it as we do it. So hopefully it isn't exactly the same each week. So there's a bit of change and novelty, but we did a little bit of savoring, just taking advantage of the blue sky, bit of gratitude. As I said, that can be super tough if we are in depression. We'll be what's called anhedonic, which means we don't feel the positive emotions in the same way. We might feel very numb and disconnected from that. And the challenge there is to really go for concentration and focus. Now, your mind might say, well, I can't focus because I'm so distractible because of what I'm going through. Okay, that is true. That's definitely true. It's harder to focus when we're experiencing mental health challenges, but we can still practice it. We can still make a commitment to, okay, every time my mind wanders off, I'm going to come back. I'm going to, come back, and it will get better in time. It will come back and be stronger. And sometimes actually we deepen our sense of concentration through struggle. That was certainly true for me. When I struggled with my mental health in the past, there were times where I couldn't focus at all. I couldn't read an email. I couldn't think. I couldn't focus at all. But learning to practice concentration in that time, I feel like I developed a level of focus that has never left me and, is always useful, and I can use it no matter what's going on in my life, whatever's difficult. So it's a little bit like sometimes if we've had a physical injury and we rehabilitate it and we strengthen the area around it, we might end up stronger than we were before because there were all kinds of muscles and things in that area that we'd never worked on, we'd never strengthened. So actually that injury becomes a way that we actually get stronger. There may be a vulnerability in there somewhere, but there's also strength that we've cultivated. So, if you're struggling with that positive mood, at least practice focus, curiosity, engagement, and acceptance of when our mind wanders, acceptance of when, we're distracted, or when it's hard to focus, or we feel numb. I talked about it a bit in the beginning, that we have, these different loops of and different aspects of our mind. So we have like an older brain, which, if we look at the evolutionary history of brains, we can see it tracking back into other animals and other species. We have similar parts of our brain, and it's really this threat detection, fight, flight, freeze, sort of drives and motives around survival and resources and things like that, and certain social dynamics as well. We have that older brain, but then we have a newer brain that can worry, it can plan, it can empathize and mentalize and get into people's minds. It can predict the worst, it can analyze and judge and do all this kind of thinking. And in some ways, that new brain is an amazing thing that has helped humans do as well as we have. But in the context of mental health, it can turn back on itself, and it can create a lot of our issues. And the example that my supervisor Chris uses for this is that it's a bit like the immune system, that the immune system is really good. It protects us, it looks after us all the time, all of us all day long. Our immune system's keeping us safe. However, we can develop autoimmune diseases when the immune system turns back on itself. So something that evolution kind of evolved to protect us and keep us safe has the capacity to turn back on itself. And this is a bit the same with these new brain loops. And one way to see these new brain loops in the context of mental health is a metaphor or example I like. And we're just going to do this as a reflection here. So as you sit there, the first question I'm going to ask you is, whatever you do right now, whatever you do not think about your favorite food. Just keep it out of your mind. Do not picture that beautiful, delicious meal. Keep it out of your mind. And what happens? You can't keep it out of your mind for long, right? Some people will be a very clear image of that food. For other people, it's words, it's memories, it's a felt sense. But, even if you could keep it out of your mind, it won't stay out for long. And I've had people that have done things like this, and later that night you have a dream about the thing you've tried to keep out of your mind. So our mind cannot keep that stuff out for very long. Now there's a second type of thinking though, which is a little bit different. So now if I say to you, start to imagine either how you would cook that meal or how you would purchase and acquire it. So where you would go, what restaurant, or if you're cooking it, how would you start to cook it? And start to just talk yourself through that in your mind and picture it. How would you make that meal? And now stop that. Just stop planning that meal. Wherever you got to in the recipe, just put it down. And you can do that, right? With that secondary level of thinking, you can stop that. You can't stop the intrusive, automatic image of the food coming into your mind. But to some degree, you can put down planning the recipe and thinking it through. Now this shows us these two types of thoughts in our minds. We have the automatic, intrusive ones, and then we have the ruminative, analytical thinking loops. And this is a simple example, and there's not much at stake here, not much emotion around it. So of course it's much easier to put it down. If you have anxiety loops going on where you really feel like you or your family are at risk, you're not safe, or socially you're going to embarrass yourself, that has a lot more charge to it. So it's much harder to let go of it. Or, if you're feeling hopeless or helpless because of depression, it's much harder to put it down. But to some degree, it is the same as that. There is an automatic level of anxiety and depression, but then there's a secondary ruminative loop that with our mindfulness skills, we can get better and better at putting it down and then coming back to the present moment. And if we do that, if we get better at putting those secondary loops down and coming back to the present moment, then our emotions are going to have more of this wave-like quality that, something painful, difficult happens in life, we're going to feel a lot of emotion, but because we're not then feeding it with rumination and analytical thinking and worry and judgment, then it's gonna come back down again. Now, the exception to this is if we're in a threatening, dangerous environment, then it's not going to be such a beautiful wave. It's going to stay high, and even then it might come down a bit if we do this, but that's a different matter. But if our life has some space and capacity for self-care, it's going to have this more wave-like flow to it. Or it's going to be the wave won't go as high, or it's a lot more bearable to be in the wave because we're not feeding it with this secondary suffering. So this is a practice, dropping anchor. All these skills are going to help us to do this, to be less caught in that automatic loop. Now, to some degree, that secondary thinking is quite automatic. That planning that recipe just happens, and if we've reinforced and trained it and wired it up in our brain, those neural pathways have been triggered a lot, so it happens very quick, very rapidly. So it can take training and practice to be able to put it down and to not doing it, and then just to allow the automatic part to come and go. But all of us can get better and better and better at it, and certainly I've had times in my life when 24/7 I had certain anxious, obsessive, worried, depressive thought loops going on, but you can get better and better at putting it down so that doesn't happen anymore. So that's our kind of mindfulness skills. That's more the thoughts. Now, it's very similar with the feelings, although with the feelings we have an attentional checking is the secondary loop. So rather than the analysis and ruminating, it might be like, we might analyze and ruminate why we have a feeling. We might be thinking, why have I got this? Why me? What's this about? What does it mean? How can I get rid of it? What's it about? Or we might have our attention just keeps coming to the difficult feeling or the pain, and it keeps checking. And is it still there? What's it like? Is it threatening? So the same thing happens with attention to some degree, and we can practice unhooking from that, allowing the automatic attention, but not feeding it with focusing on a difficult feeling and ruminating and analyzing it. So anyway, just some ideas, really, stuff to practice with dropping anchor.